You're listening to Turi Ryder's She Said What podcast. I'm Turi, along with Marcy Persky. As Marcy and I record this, it is the middle of the Jewish holiday season, which means there's a lot of eating going on, which means you really don't want to watch some people eat. While you were gaining 2 pounds, I was also at several festive dinners. And I was reminded yet again of the importance of table manners.
Okay.
Now, I have literally been known to watch a YouTube video on how to eat properly at a formal dinner table because I did not grow up with people who ate in a particularly polished manner. I grew up with people who were children of people, or in some cases, the actual people who grew up without enough to eat. And so food was to be slammed in your mouth as fast as you could get it in there. And also, because they were chatty and conversationalists, it didn't matter if you were chewing and talking simultaneously and little bits of brisket gravy were flying out. It was not an easy way to learn table manners. You sort of learned them as a form of rebellion. Watch this. I'm going to close my mouth when I chew. That was sort of how I grew up. And my form
I have
of
one
rebellion.
question to interject here.
Yes.
How long have you been married?
I have been married 27 years, something like that.
That was the last formal dinner I went to.
All I can tell you is you haven't had to look for work as often as I have. So when they take you out,
never involves eating
for those interview lunches and dinners, I've learned do not order the salad. If I stick my fork in a cherry tomato one more time, you'd think it took me years to learn. Do not try to eat a cherry tomato at any kind of dinner where there are people who do not know you very well. Because a cherry tomato, cherry tomato is not really a food. It's a clothing accessory.
It's a cherry bomb.
It's pretty much, you stick your fork or your knife, whatever you try. It's highly compressed in there. I would not be surprised if the people who designed nuclear weapons took as their model the cherry tomato. Especially those little cluster bomblets, those things. Those are basically, that's a cherry tomato for you right there. So I am not speaking of this sort of almost inevitable catastrophe that will befall every mannerly person at some point or other. I am speaking here of people who either were raised with parents who just didn't care or who went away to college and found themselves, I don't know, regressing to livestock. The first time I noticed it was, when I was dating. I would rule people out if they could not chew with their mouths closed, which seems like pretty much the lowest threshold you could set. And yet, by the time I met the spousal unit, I'd been to therapy and I thought, okay, I really like this guy, but he does chew and talk with his mouth open. I better say something before I weed out another guy who... So I, with my characteristic politesse, I looked at him and his mouthful of French toast and I said, I'm not going to spend the next decades of my life with someone whose food I have to see both before and after he eats it.
So you drew that line early.
Right. So he shaped up pretty fast. And then I worked on the children and I made sure that they also could use a knife and fork, sit reasonably close, like within radar distance of the table, keep most of their body off of it, make sure their heads were not supported by anything other than their necks as they ate. That was a big one I noticed. The head and the hand with I don't even know how you do that. So again,
do you have that one kid that takes like an hour that's like still eating when everybody else is waiting to get up?
No, but you have twice as many kids as I do. So if I'd
That's
kept
true.
going, maybe I would have. But
And we had a rule that you couldn't get up until everyone was finished.
oh my gosh.
But yes, you couldn't just gobble and run. And yes, I had this one kid who still is the slowest eater in the history of the world. He just savors every bite. It has to be.
And you don't want to rush them.
That's true too.
One of the problems in our house seems to be that, unlike that joke about once you learn to ride a bicycle, you can do it forever, in our house, there seems to be a problem with table manners that you would imagine once you've learned them are permanent, but it seems they can be unlearned. When the big cutie came home from college during the COVID experience, all of the table manners had sort of flown away. He was talking and eating, and I finally looked at him and said, nobody at this dinner table is wearing a face shield. You may be around them all day in your work, the COVID face shield, but here at the table, we have no protection against your flying bits of broccoli. And good luck with dating, unless the idea behind this is to never have to buy somebody a meal in a restaurant ever, in which case you're doing great.
There you go.
But this weekend, have you ever been in one of those social situations where something is terribly wrong and you think everybody notices it, but it's possible that you're the only one noticing it and you can't wait to get the heck out of there so that you can ask somebody if it was as weird as you thought it was?
Yes.
Seated across the table from me was somebody with the strangest way of eating that I have ever seen. Well, let me correct that. The strangest way I've ever seen for somebody to eat who isn't in a high chair with a tray in front of them. But this dinner was about 17 years post high chair. And nobody seemed to think it was odd that he literally put his head down on his plate and scooped his food. At one point, he ate with a knife and fork, but for most of the meal, so I knew he could do it, he just stuck his face down in his plate and kind of vacuumed.
My mom would have said, you were not brought up in a barn.
Well, your mom and I and you, but his parents seemed oblivious to the fact. And this kid will soon be gone to college.
Yeah.
How do you, I could understand if you're a little short person and your plate is, at the edge of the table and your head, if you're 6 or 7 and you come just up to the edge of the table.
Let's leave short people out of this.
Or even if you're really a tall person, maybe it's a really long way for you to get your fork to your 6'5" frame, in which case maybe you hunch over a little bit, but he just seemed to have been raised in a home where it was acceptable to practically lick your plate with all your meal on it while it was on the table.
So did you biff him on the back of the head and say, sit up?
I was sitting across the table from him, so I was just stuck for the duration.
That sucks.
You know what would have helped me, though, right then and there? If I'd had like a pint of cherry tomatoes, I could have eaten them in self-defense.
There you go.
If you've made it this far, chances are you've been enjoying Turi Ryder's She Said What podcast, in which case you might also like my book, She Said What, A Life on the Air. You can find that at your neighborhood independent bookstore or on Amazon. Marcy and I really appreciate your good reviews wherever you care to leave them. Your kind words help the podcast grow. Thanks.